what do we do? How do we deal with this situation? We need to redefine what a reasonable expectation of privacy is in this digital realm. Okay, we have a pretty good idea of what it means in what I call meat space, in our carbon-based physical world. You know, I throw a rock, breaks a window, that's a no-no. I can see an immediate harm and damage, and you know, there's not going to be any real dispute amongst society from a normative or a legal perspective that that's the wrong thing to do. That's an unreasonable act to engage in. So this notion, as I mentioned, this notion of reasonable expectation of privacy was formed in the physical world, in the boundaries of our physical world, where it was, you know, think traditional physics, time and space, boundaries. Hard to copy, hard to replicate information, and easy to delete information. And it's not so in the cyberspace. It's actually sort of the exact opposite. It's easy to copy. It's trivial to reproduce, often unbeknownst to us, and it's hard to delete. I mean, how do you know you've deleted everything on your hard drive in a network? So our technology automates, it makes things efficient, it helps make our lives better in a lot of ways, but it also simultaneously, in parallel, it removes these speed bumps that we've formed our notions of privacy around. And again, this then has seeped into our control structures, our law, our marketplace, our society norms. And so this technology, the speed of development of technology really is outpacing our ability to evolve our notion of reasonable expectation of privacy in the internet electronic space. So we always know, and I think this is part of the value of the law, you know, we need some stability. So the law will always lag behind technology development, which is okay. But it's the delta between the technology change and the legal change, I think, is where the risk is growing and where we need to be concerned. So here's a good example. So the telephone, the technology of the telephone took approximately 89 years to reach 150 million people. Television, approximately 38 years to reach 150 million people. We moved down to the cell phone, it took 14 years. Moved down to the iPod, 7 years, and Facebook, obviously not a technology per se, an application within the technology, took 5 years to reach 150 million people. So that sort of gives you a good context to think about the rapidity of the change that we're undergoing and the challenges. You know, with the telephone, we had 89 years to sort of develop this notion from a legal perspective and as well as other perspectives of, you know, what's reasonable? Can we tap in? What can we do to this information? I mean, if I'm talking in my house, can I expect it to be private? If I'm on a cell phone, is there an expectation of privacy? If I'm in a phone booth? And so we've had, you know, many, many decades to deal with that and to develop the case law and get it wrong, and so in the hopes of, you know, getting it right, which you know, we've in theory arrived at, and we're not there yet from a technology electronic internet technology space. So what's the consequence of this lag time? We've got this growing gap, as I mentioned before, between our technologies, our capabilities, I should say. So think of technology as representing what our capabilities are, and our expectations being represented by the law. So the law basically tells us, you know, what we can and can't do. Technology tells us, you know, what's possible. So, for example, some cases here. Can the recording industry go into my computer? Because technically, we know it's possible. It's very capable for them to, you know, send their agents over the wires and get into my computer, search through my computer, even destroy files in my computer. Can they go to my ISP and just, you know, claim that I've violated their rights and uncover my identity? Is an internet protocol address, is that considered personally identifiable for purposes of triggering certain privacy laws? And I'll talk about this in a little bit, from a sharing of network research data perspective, it has huge consequences. If internet protocol addresses are considered personally identifiable, it invokes a lot more protections, especially from the standpoint of the main Electronic Communications Law, which is called the Electronic Communications and Privacy Act, ECPA. And again, from a more macro perspective, in the U.S., in comparison to Europe, we have a patchwork of laws. And our legal structure here says, you know what, you don't really own your data. And they've really allowed companies to lay claim to your personal data that you use in engaging in various commercial transactions. And then the question is, so what? Well, what this ultimately is resulting in, I'm building up this baseline understanding here, hopefully, amongst us before I jump into the use case, is it creates this situation where we've got this confusing rights and relationship. We don't know who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, what my right is, what I can do from a digital self-help perspective to assert my rights and assert my privileges. This slide, I think, pretty much sums up the whole notion that I'm talking about. And I'll walk through it briefly, and I think it might be something that you might want to digest offline at some point if you get a copy of the slides. But this is how I conceive of the situation with regard to changing reasonable expectations of privacy and the privacy risks and where data sharing fits in. So this graph, again, illustrates where innovation and sharing and the privacy threat and other digital threats coincide. So look at the green line, and that sort of parallels Moore's law. That represents the speed of technology, the rate of technology change. And simultaneously, it represents the rate of change of our capabilities. Our capabilities are going to map to our technology evolution. The very bottom red line, then, is a representation of our law. Not a flat line, but you can see that the rate of change is quite different from our capability/technology Moore's law line above. And in that whole middle area is sort of this gray risk area. And the yellow line represents the various levels of our activities online. So it's the rights that we assert in the online environment. And I think sort of my theory hypothesis is, as that delta between the bottom red line and the yellow lines increases, it increases the number of people who are technically in violation of the law, increases the level of confusion about rights and responsibilities, and it really creates a society where the efficient avoidance of risk is greatly avoidance of risk would be minimized. Maximized. So it's exacerbated. And what's driving? And I made mention of this earlier. What's driving this cloud in the middle and this delta to increase? Well, I noted about 7 different categories here that really forces the yellow line representing our activities online to increase the delta. The value of intellectual property and just how information in and of itself has become a commodity. It's not a means to an end anymore. It really is an end of itself. So there's going to be more people vying for intellectual property rights. There's a huge failure of our traditional ordering forces, meaning law enforcement. Their level of involvement and ability to enforce the laws is quite different than in the physical world. Oftentimes people don't even turn to law enforcement when there's a cybercrime, and this gets to this notion of digital self-help. Technology really enables us to engage in digital self-help. We don't necessarily need to turn to law enforcement. I mean, if someone is DDoSing me and I'm technically savvy enough, I can fire packets back at them and shut down their server as easily as they can shut mine down. So this notion of mano a mano, so to speak, is greatly exacerbated. We also come from this history of the internet culture of laissez-faire. Information wants to be free. There should be no regulation. We should be able to do what we want online. That facilitates the delta increasing as well. We've got user as a participant. So no longer are we talking about a user, a unidirectional exchange of information where I sit in front of a TV and just watch media. But as users on the internet, we're creating content, we're ingesting content. It's a two-way street. So it empowers people to actually embrace the technology even more.